These players will go absolutely insane in fantasy football this week. I don't care how big your league is, what the league size is. It could be 2 people, it could be 16 people. Start these players that are going absolutely nuclear in week 13 of fantasy football. Make sure to stick around to the end of the video as well, because I will go over my one secret start of the week that might just be available on your waiver wire, but they will put up 20 plus fantasy points. I guarantee it. If you guys do appreciate this video and want to be generous today, hit that like button. It takes 2 seconds. It's free, but I don't waste your time. Let's get right into it. Marvin Harrison Jr., the first absolutely insane start of the week. He's going to smash his projections. Now, people might be hesitant starting this name in fantasy football. Over the last 7 games, he's the wide receiver 30. He's averaging 8.7 fantasy points a game. He's been extremely boom bust. But today is the day we put him into our starting lineups and we don't think twice about it. Last week, he had a down game, 7.7 fantasy points in what was supposed to be a positive matchup against the Seattle defense, which has been allowing a good amount of fantasy points to wide receivers. But the plus side, he did see a career high in snap percentage in that matchup at 95%. Those statistics are important because the more you're on field, the more routes you're going to run, the more opportunities you're going to have. And he's had a 17% or higher target share over the last 5 games. Now he gets a matchup against a struggling Vikings secondary. This game is supposed to be an implied total of 45 points. That's on the higher side of implied team totals. And the Cardinals are 4-point underdogs in this matchup as well, which is going to allude to the fact that they should be in a pass-first script, especially considering how you have to play the Vikings if you want to beat them. Over the second half of the season, the Vikings are top 5 in points allowed to the wide receivers, but again, you have to play to the strengths and weaknesses of other defenses, even if it's not necessarily your play style. When you look at the Cardinals, they're a more balanced team until they get blown out. The Vikings allow the 5th most passing yards to opposing offenses, but the number 1 least amount of rushing yards to opposing offenses. So that's going to be tough for the run game. James Conner might be in for a tougher one, but it means the pass game is going to thrive and it's going to eat. And Marvin Harrison is actually running more routes than he was in the beginning of the year. And by that, I mean the types of routes. His route tree is completely different. In the beginning of the year, the first 7-8 weeks, he was running strictly vertical routes, whether it was deep posts, it was stop and goes, go routes, whatever it is. 90% of the routes he was running was deep. But now you look at his route tree, he's running a lot more closer to the line of scrimmage. He's running more slants, just more short yardage opportunities, and that's what's going to get him over the hump in those PPR leagues, because you get those receptions. That's why guys like Amon-Ra are so good, because they play from the slot, but they get a lot of receptions. And we look at Marvin Harrison, he is also top 5 in targets per route run, first downs per route run, and total yards per route run against press coverage specifically. The Vikings run a good amount of press coverage. The Cardinals team in total is definitely a little bit more unpredictable, but if this so happens to be a positive game for Kyler Murray in this offense and one that they can put it together, Marvin Harrison Jr. is easily going to go over 20 fantasy points and dominate for your fantasy team. Go ahead and stick him in there. But another wide receiver here, a true breakout for week 13, is going to be Brian Thomas. He comes into this matchup against a struggling Texans secondary. You see the trend here with these secondaries. They just allowed Will Levis to possibly have, in my opinion, the best game of his pro career in the NFL, just shy of 300 passing yards and 2 touchdowns, 354 yards, 32 attempts for Cooper Rush the week before that, 240 passing yards for 2 touchdowns to Jared Goff. Yes, he did have those 5 interceptions in that matchup, but that's besides the point. 211 and 3 touchdowns to Aaron Rodgers and no turnovers. You guys get the point. The game total for the matchup with the Jaguars and the Texans is at 44 points, but the Texans are favored by almost a touchdown, meaning the Jaguars are likely going to be trailing early and often in this matchup, leading to more opportunities for the wide receivers, more pass first. And we look at this Jaguars team, there's really nobody else to be target competition for him outside of Evan Ingram. Brian Thomas Jr. is really the only one. Parker Washington, Tim Jones, these guys are nowhere near threats to those targets. And we look at Trevor Lawrence, he is questionable coming into this matchup, but every single report that we've seen coming up to today expects him to be a 100% participant and expected to play in this matchup. So that's making BTJ that much better of a play. In the last time that these two teams played in week 12 of last season, Trevor Lawrence was the quarterback 6 and had 364 passing yards. I expect a minimum of 6 receptions and about 60 yards for Brian Thomas Jr. this week and a nuclear start. We are also going to be going to a running back here. Bucky Irving will absolutely crush for you this week. He gets the number 1 best matchup of the week against the Carolina Panthers. They have allowed over 100 yards and a touchdown per game to running backs so far for the entirety of the year. They give up the number 1 most rushing yards to running backs and the 3rd most all-purpose yards to running backs and the number 1 most points to opposing offenses. So everything is green in this matchup. Taking a deeper look into the backfield, last week was the first week that we saw Bucky outperform and generally outsnap Rachaad White. It was 34 snaps to White's 32, and he also, most importantly, dominated the routes run, 20 to White's 11. Now you could say, okay, last week was a blowout. It was against the Giants. Bucky got more usage because of that. Well, you look at this matchup, they're projected to win by 6.5 points over the Panthers. So if we see another blowout potential game, there's even more of an incentive to put Bucky Irving in our lineups because he's going to get that garbage time over Rachaad White. This game is at a 46.5 total. That's the 3rd highest of the week. But again, when you have the Buccaneers favored by a touchdown, they're probably going to be scoring a ton early and often. There's a ton of scoring potential for Bucky Irving. He's also the RB5 in yards per carry this year out of every single running back. He's efficient when he gets the touches. He'll likely see a lot more this week. But a quarterback that needs to be in your starting lineup, he could possibly be on waivers here for you, is Matthew Stafford. This man has been written off essentially. He's the quarterback 20 on the year, but he's weighed down by his time without his top wide receivers in Puka and Cooper Kupp. In those matchups without his top guys, he's a quarterback 43 on the season, averaging 8.4 fantasy points a game. You really can't make that up. We can all agree that is absolute booty cheeks. But then if we isolate the top 5 games that he played with his receivers, the only 5 games he played with them both healthy this year, he's the quarterback 9. Now he comes into a matchup against the Saints, which might look negative if you look at fantasy points allowed for the entire season, but it's actually a lot more choppy than you'd expect. They're averaging the 8th most points to opposing quarterbacks over their last 5 games isolated, and the Rams have one of the highest individual point totals this week, projected at 26.5 points. You can't tell me that Matthew Stafford won't get at least 2 passing touchdowns if they put up almost 30 points. The Saints secondary has been struggling ever since Marshawn Lattimore got traded to the Commanders. Puka and Cooper Kupp as a wide receiver 1 and 2. They're wide receiver 1s on every single team you play for, so they are going to absolutely dominate the secondary. He's easily a top 10 option this week. But another guy I guarantee is going to dominate this week. If you're in a shallower league, whatever it is, George Pickens. Make sure you're not playing against him this week too. If you are, you want to listen to this. George Pickens is going to be absolutely insane this week. He's getting a matchup against the Bengals that's a top 3 matchup for wide receiver points this year. And that team has been getting torched over the top. In the last 4 games, they're averaging 32.5 points allowed to opposing offenses. And if we take a look at George Pickens himself, he has dominated with Wilson at quarterback. If we compare his numbers to the ones with Justin Fields, he's averaging 15.9 fantasy points a game and 88 receiving yards with Wilson compared to 10 fantasy points with Justin Fields. It's obvious that his role with Russell Wilson in this offense is absolutely the one you want to be going for. Since week 7, that's the week that Russell Wilson started, he's averaging more points per game than Justin Jefferson, AJ Brown, Terry McLaurin, Gail Wilson. The list goes on for a lot more of these top wide receivers. The Bengals are all offense, no defense. It's a 46.5 projected game total. This means there's going to be a lot of scoring, and the Steelers are underdogs, which suggests they will be passing a lot, just like we know the Bengals will, because they're still fighting for what they hope to be a playoff spot for them. But the combination of Justin Herbert and Ladd McConkey will skyrocket this week. You want to be starting them if you have them in your lineups. They get a matchup against the Falcons, who are top 5 in points allowed to quarterbacks and wide receivers this year, respectively, over the past month isolated. Baker just had 3 passing touchdowns and 29 fantasy points on them. Derek Carr, out of all people, put up 23 fantasy points on them with no help at the wide receiver position. Bo Nix had his best career game. And the number one reason that Ladd McConkey and Justin Herbert have been seeing so much success is because of volume and opportunity. The Chargers from weeks 1 through 7 were last in passing attempts in the entire NFL at 194 passing yards. That's absolutely atrocious. And if we look at Herbert specifically, he was only averaging 5.4 rushing yards a game, and he was averaging 11.9 fantasy points. You isolate the second half of the season, weeks 8 through 12, Herbert is averaging 30 passing attempts a game, averaging 248 yards, but most importantly, 35.4 rushing yards a game and 21 fantasy points a game since that stretch. That is an insane difference, giving you a huge floor for Justin Herbert to be starting. The Chargers and Harbaugh are letting Justin Herbert pass a ton. They're giving him the reins, which is making him so much better of a fantasy option, but also trickling into these wide receivers, and why you need to be starting Ladd McConkey 100%, because quarterback success is very much correlated to wide receiver success. We talk about the increase in volume. In that first half of the season, weeks 1 through 7, Ladd McConkey was averaging 44.2 yards and 11 fantasy points. That second half of the season, after weeks 1 through 7, 86.6 yards and 16.1 fantasy points. That is a very big difference as well. Again, the Falcons are a top matchup. This is a 48-point projected total. There's going to be a ton of scoring. Start these guys. But as for my sleeper start of the week, you can possibly get both of these guys on your waiver wire. It is going to be a stack. Those guys are Drake May and Hunter Henry. Let's start with Drake May. He comes into this week 13 matchup against the Colts. They are 6th in passing yards allowed to opposing offenses this year, and they are 4th in total yardage given up as well. A lot of that struggle for the Colts has come because they don't have a great pressure rate. They are bottom 10 in sacks this year, which is a main reason why they're allowing 350 all-purpose yards to offenses per game. But that's been one of the biggest issues for Drake May this season. He has not had time in the pocket, but he can salvage a couple extra seconds against this Colts defense pretty easily. It's going to give him a ton more upside, keeping in mind he is the quarterback 5 in rushing yards this year, averaging 8.7 yards per carry, and he's projected for over 30 rushing yards as well. That's about a 3-point cushion for your fantasy points if you're going to be starting him this week. And again, that correlation addition is why we're going to be starting the stack of Hunter Henry as well. He is the main beneficiary. The Colts are allowing the 4th most points to opposing tight ends. They're a great matchup, and the Patriots will have to be playing from behind. They are 3-point underdogs in this matchup. Hunter Henry is a great tight end. He has a great target share at 20.7. That's good for the tight end 7 on the year, and he runs a ton of routes. He's the tight end 5 in participation and the tight end 8 in total routes run per game. The game total is low, only at 42 points, but we've been fringe starting these two guys for the whole season, and they barely score touchdowns. So any points that they do score is going to be a plus for Hunter Henry, and obviously Drake May as well. But that is going to finish it off for this video of the must starts of the week. Let me know if you guys do like this style of video, and all glory to the man above.